If you go outside on a clear night and look up at the sky, it looks like the universe is beautiful and peaceful. Nothing changes, nothing happens. But that really is an illusion. The universe is a violent place. In the last few decades, we've started to monitor asteroids. There are tens of thousands of big ones across the Earth's orbit. Any one of those could hit us. Just to give some sense of the energy that these impacts create, then even smallish objects at 10, 20 meters across, when they hit the Earth's atmosphere, deposit the energy of 20, 30, 50 Hiroshima bombs.
And it's roughly 5 to 10 kilometers wide.
An extinction level event.
I think that we take our safety and our existence on this planet for granted. So impacts happen, naturally occurring events that can threaten a city or a country or a continent or indeed our civilization happen. And the reason we ignore them, really, is because they don't happen very often. But low probability events happen. And the thing about probabilities is that they're not certainties. So until we see one coming, and until we can map its orbit, then we can't say with any certainty when the next one will hit. In Don't Look Up, the threat is from a comet. Comets exist in the far frozen outer reaches of the solar system in a region called the Kuiper Belt and then the Oort cloud, far beyond the orbit of Neptune. And there are millions of these things. They're icy snowballs, but they're big. And very often, those comets that come into the solar system are new discoveries. Now, comets don't have orbits that cross the Earth every year or 2 years or so. Even if they come back and come back and come back, like Halley's Comet, you can be talking about 80, 100, 200, 1,000 years. And so, unlike the asteroids, we can't really ever assume that we can map their orbits. The film is very accurate, actually. In the film, we have 6 months from detection of this thing to the impact, and that's fairly typical for a comet.
I keep getting the same result, a direct hit of Earth in 6 months and 14 days.
Me too.
So the United States has an organization now which goes by the catchy title of the Near-Earth Orbit Impact Threat Emergency Protocols Interagency Working Group, or NITEP-IWG, I think is how they pronounce it. It's a collection of organizations that are charged with observing and mapping the paths of potentially dangerous asteroids, and also then dealing with them if we see one that may be a threat. There is a protocol in place, actually. There's a flow chart. Detect it, make precision observations, assess whether there's a greater than 1% chance of impact. Then you have to model what happens if this thing hits. And eventually, there is a civil defense contingency. So do we evacuate the city or do we try to move it? And a lot of it, I suppose quite disturbingly in a way, but I suppose it's the way it has to be, a lot of it is to do with the economic impact of the impact.
I say we sit tight and assess.
The decision you're making is to sit tight and assess?
I'm sorry, who is she?
Because we have powerful computers and we have precise observations, within about, 2 months from detection, then we'll have a complete planning scenario. And on that basis, then we can decide what we should do about it. And it says this in the report as well. If we have about 3 years or 4 years, then that is how long it takes at the moment to construct a spacecraft which might be able to deflect it. So, but we need 3 or 4 years at the moment because we don't have those spacecraft lined up because they're billion-dollar spacecraft. So let's say Chelsea or Manchester United spend more on the wages of the footballers every year than we spend as a civilization on asteroid defense. Think about our priorities as a civilization. Now, you might say, well, in that case, shouldn't we line a load of these spacecraft up, ready? Maybe, yes. But the problem is, we don't know how big that spacecraft has got to be or what kind of technology it's got to employ. Should it have a nuclear warhead on it? Should it just nudge it? Should it just bang into it? We don't really know until you've seen the sort of object and the size of object that's causing the problem. There's a mission called DART, which is, as I speak, currently flying towards an asteroid. And it's going to hit the asteroid, so it's what's called an impactor mission. And that's testing out the technologies that we will need in the future, potentially, to deflect one. I mean, would you want trillions of dollars of your money spent lining up lots of different spacecraft in order to protect us from something that might not happen in the next 10,000 years? Maybe you'd say no, and that's the dilemma. If you're trying to convince some politicians or a government to invest hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in technology and mapping systems and mapping programs to mitigate these events, then if I say, well, it's very, very unlikely that it'll happen when you're in office, right, then I suppose there's a tendency to go, oh, well, leave it for the next person then. And that's just the way that our brains work and our political cycles work. One of the things I love about the film, and I think the reasons that it's very important, is that it really does deal with the level of trust that people have in scientific statements. You see it with Leo DiCaprio's character. I think it's beautifully acted and beautifully written, where he tries to be very, very precise.
Exactly, 99.78% to be exact.
Oh, great. Okay, so it's not 100%.
Well, scientists never like to say 100%.
Call it 70% and let's move on.
And suddenly there's a window to sort of distrust the science and deflect yourself away from the potential catastrophic nature of the prediction. We know that there are objects out there that we have not yet discovered that may pose a threat. And that's notoriously difficult. You see it in the film. Right? In fact, in the film, you see that people can see the thing in the sky. Right? You can actually look up and see it. And still, there's a robust public debate about whether it's there.
We're hearing that there is no comet.
Even though you could look up and see it.
We've been trying to tell you. We've been trying to tell you this whole time. It's right there. It's right there, Kate.
I think one of the problems we face as a civilization is we don't know how valuable we are. In our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are 400 billion stars and countless trillions of planets. And yet, it is possible that you could count the number of civilizations on the fingers of one hand. In fact, it's possible that there is only one, and that's us, here. That talk about meaning. There's a word that doesn't sound particularly scientific. Meaning, what does it mean to exist? Well, I would argue that meaning is a property of intelligence. And if this planet is the only place where intelligence exists, then I would argue that this is the only place where meaning exists in a galaxy of 400 billion stars. And it's possible that by not taking the violence of the universe seriously, we may allow or be complicit in the destruction of meaning in a galaxy. There's a very famous name in space exploration, Robert Zubrin. I interviewed him once, and he said to me, ideas have consequences. And the worst idea that we have ever had as a human civilization is that we have access to limited resources. The correct thing to say is we have access to limited resources on Earth. And indeed, we have to be extremely careful because there are limited resources on Earth. That means that we fight over them and we damage our planet and our environment. But, Zubrin points out, the idea is false. It's false because the moment you lift your gaze up from the surface of the Earth and out into space to the asteroid belt and beyond, then you see that there are effectively unlimited resources out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we thought, what the world thought was an impending and terrifying danger, turns out to be an astonishing opportunity.
There's one fact that I love, which is out there in the asteroid belt, which is where most of the asteroids are. And there is enough metal to build a skyscraper 100 stories high and cover the entire Earth in it. Asteroids are not just a threat, they're a tremendous opportunity. You see that in the film. In fact, the fact that they are potentially tremendously valuable ultimately leads to our destruction.
The comet actually contains almost $140 trillion worth of assets.
$140 trillion.
In terms of mining asteroids, we know what many of the asteroids are made of because a lot of them have landed on Earth. I mean, here's a piece of one, and it's very heavy. Many of them are metal rich. And so these are valuable things. Interestingly, the technology that we need to deflect them, to mitigate the risks, is pretty much the same technology that we need to go and mine them. So the question arises, what role do big corporations currently play? In the film, the bad guys, well, virtually everyone's a bad guy actually, but one of the primary bad guys is Bash Cellular. I don't think we should demonize the companies that build the technology, because one day we're going to need them.
I call this one Primo, the first.
If you look at what SpaceX have done and Blue Origin are doing, then they are making access to space reliable and relatively cheap. And the revolution in the last decade or so has been the invention of reusable rockets. Imagine how expensive it would be to fly from London to New York if you got on the plane, flew across the Atlantic, got off the plane, and then the plane exploded. It'd be ridiculous, single-use aircraft. One of the things I really love about the film is that it addresses a problem that worries, I think, all of us in science, and all of us in many fields of human endeavour, actually, which is how do we compete with all the noise in our civilization? How do we make people pay attention to reliable and important knowledge when there's so much unreliable and trivial knowledge out there competing for mental space? Just think about it for a moment. Are you really more interested in the private life of your favourite celebrity than you are in the protection of intelligent life in a galaxy of 400 billion stars? Are you really more concerned about that? You're probably saying yeah. You're probably saying yes. Actually, probably, as I speak, you're on your phone trying to have a look at what what the football results are.
The thing of it is we really did have everything, didn't we? I mean, what do you think about it?
The last line that Leo DiCaprio's character delivers, I think is really powerful, an important line. He's right. We do have it all. This is the only place where anything probably matters. I think it would be a tragedy, I'm sure you agree, if you only realise that with 30 seconds to go before the comet hits. My advice, if we're to avoid the fate of our civilization depicted in the film, is to look up, to face nature in all its beauty and all its terror. Don't hide your head in the sand. Don't shy away from the universe beyond, because if you do that, then before we know it, something will come tearing down from the skies and wipe us out.